Let's talk about the difference between a bent leg RDL and a stiff leg RDL. So on the left is a bent leg RDL, on the right is a picture of a stiff leg RDL. The difference between these is simply that one is going to bias the glutes more, that would be the bent leg on the left, and one is going to bias the hamstrings more, that would be the stiff leg on the right. Now both of these will use both hamstrings and glutes, but the bent leg will bias more glutes and the stiff leg will bias more hamstrings. Now, the main difference between these movements is actually in the name. The bent leg RDL is going to have a greater bend in the knee and thus greater hip hinge. The stiff leg RDL is going to have less knee bend and less hip hinge. Now let's take a look at some videos of each movement here. I'm going to demonstrate the stiff leg RDL. You'll notice that, again, I don't have a ton of bend in my knees. I'm sinking down, pushing the hips back, but it's not going to be as great of a hip hinge as it would be in the bent leg RDL. With this bent leg, which we're now in right now, you'll see that my knees are going to be bending a lot more, and thus my hips are going to be hinging a lot further over. Again, both glutes and hamstrings are working in both of these movements, but with this movement, with a greater bend in the knee and a greater hip hinge, we're going to be utilizing more of a glute bias. Now, this movement can be hard sometimes for people, and that's where this tip can really help. We can actually place our legs against a bench. What we're looking for here is that your knee joint is just above the bench. Push the back of your calf into the bench and push your hips back. This allows us to stay really stable and really focus on that knee flexion and that hip hinge part of the movement. Now, this movement, I'm actually standing on some mini plates to get my knees up high enough. I'll show you what happens if your knees aren't high enough. When I stand on the floor, I'm actually not tall enough, and you'll see that the back of my knees, where I actually want to be pushing them back, bump into the bench. So by standing just on something that gives you a little bit of elevation like a plate, it'll allow your legs to hinge and your knees to bend where we want them to be. Hope this visual and walkthrough helps you understand the difference between a bent leg and a stiff leg RDL.